Okay, hi everybody. When I was in college, I did a thesis paper on the history of RKO, which is why we're going to talk about King Kong. It's a big hit, but I also want to get a little bit of the background as I talk about my we get into the background, I'll talk about the review and everything. And primarily with King Kong, you got to understand with RKO, they needed a monster hit. I'm trying to use a pun also.
Yeah,
they needed something
because
they were constantly sold as mediocre films, pretty much average films. They need to get rid of that label. They needed to find something, and they found it.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely a movie about guerrilla filmmaking.
Yeah.
Today we're talking King Kong. All right, welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hi, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. Hit a like and subscribe for us. We really do appreciate it. Put a comment down below. Keep the conversation going about our films. Yep, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great deals and the possibility to tell us what movies we should review in the future, as well as Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics reviews as well as ours. And today we're talking about the big ape. He turns 90 this April. It's King Kong.
Yeah, in case you don't know the plot. A film crew led by jungle picture maker Carl Denham has set off on a voyage to a mysterious island in search of a location to complete his latest picture. While he knows the trip will be dangerous, none of the crew members are prepared to come across a gargantuan gorilla named Kong, who has taken a liking to Denham's lead actress.
So RKO pretty much started because of sound was put into film. 1927, The Jazz Singer with Warner Brothers. RCA had the equipment. They had a great technology advance called Vitaphone they created, but they didn't have a contract with any of the big studios. Paramount, I think Universal, MGM, all were going to do something that was created by AT&T called ERPI phone. So RCA, through navigations, came up with a lease of Keith Orpheum as well as RCA, an umbrella to make movies, to produce what they thought was an advanced sound production of Videophone. RCA made great films sound-wise. Movie-wise, we're kind of average.
Yeah.
I think the best picture was Cimarron. They got a best picture, but that was it. There really was kind of an average experience going to the movie theater. They needed a kick to get something going because people generally went to see RKO films prior to 1933 just because the sound was great.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's one of those kind of like fabled lost to time studios just because,
Right.
You know, like my biggest memory of RKO is literally the backdrop in Rocky Horror Picture Show in the finale. Like that's the thing I think of when I think of RKO. I think that beep, 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 beep. And I think of the ending of a movie that's not even from their studio. So it's kind of lost to time, lost to legend, and really, you know, most of their films like King Kong today, that had some time that it was owned by Universal, some time that it was owned by Warner Brothers, and people just kind of mined it for whatever they could.
So we're going to get to King Kong. So RKO knew it needed something to give it a push. They wanted to take a risk and a gamble, and then they hired David O. Selznick. His dad was Louis O. Selznick. He used to run MGM. David came in, he was hired, and pretty much his reference was Merian C. Cooper as somebody who kind of kicked him in. I think at the time, I think Cooper was working at the New York Times doing movie reviews as well as, and he got influence to get David to run RKO.
Yeah.
I think David knew that we have to take a big gamble, and he probably asked, somewhere along the lines, probably at a lunch, do you have an idea what we could do for a movie?
Yeah. Well, it's clear, Ernest B. Schoedsack, who's the co-director with Cooper in the film, had done a number. He was kind of the Carl Denham of the film, was that because he was the one who had done the Jungle Pictures. He did, was it Chang or Grass? They'd done both of them together, and of course,
so Cooper got recognition for doing Grass with Paramount Pictures.
Yeah.
And I think through Paramount, where Louis O. Selznick was running. And then that's how the exchange was through the movie Grass, the silent film, the documentary.
And of course, even RKO had also done a couple other films that had kind of been deemed a little bit racist in how their depictions of jungle pictures were.
Yeah.
And this film, kind of carries a few of the sexist overtones, a few of the racial overtones of that time period. So it's not like they could escape it with this film, but it was kind of a way of kind of diverting it in a different direction.
At the time of the early 1930s, there was an undercurrent of infatuation of what we call these jungle movies. You had Stark Mad, you had a lot of romance jungle movies. There was attempts to do Tarzan. You had this very fascinating thing. I don't know if you can find it. It's called Inignia. Inignia.
Oh, yeah.
Ingagi. It's a fake documentary about people going to see that natives in Central America or Africa are sacrificing their females to a gorilla. And they sold it as a reel. It's a fake documentary that as sex slaves.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you're actually, you came up with the title. I was trying to, like, grab the title out of my head of the racist picture that it was known for, because there was also that idea in the film where they had African women choosing to lay with the gorillas.
And they had, like, their baby.
And the babies were, like, half black, baby, half gorilla baby. It was an incredibly racist depiction of, like, how to view, that kind of.
So it's made
ideal.
by Congo Pictures through them not paying everybody, and through the scandal they lost money. But it made, at the time, it was a big hit. It made like $4 million in 1930 during the Depression.
Yeah.
So people went to see this movie.
Yeah.
That's another catalyst to maybe we should do our fictional count, because a lot of pulp movies were of these jungle things, of monsters in the jungle, these extravagant exploration films.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, it didn't come out of just something popped in something's head. It came organically from other influences about how we can do this.
Yeah, and of course, like when you're RKO making a movie, and you need a hit, what do is you literally reinvent how filmmaking is done.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So what they did is, okay, we do mediocre story. That's fine.
Yeah.
We need something to give it a pop, and they came up with a special effect, probably revolution of the the decade, or of the,
I'm trying to think of a more meaningful effects, development up until Star Wars. After King Kong, like, I don't know if there had been another film that had really overdone how you make these kinds of movies until Star Wars, like 4 decades later.
Right. Yeah. So you have the on-by board. You were doing RKO, so RK hires his staff. So Cooper has the inspiration. We could do a show just by his life.
Yeah, we're going to get to the end and we're going to be like, have we talked about Kong yet?
Yeah, because he got like shot down twice. He was an army. He was a pilot for the France and Army in World War I. So you can tell why those planes are in the end.
Oh, and
right,
yeah, and why our co-directors are the ones who fire the fatal shot at the end.
Right, they look the same. So they have on staff. They have James Ashmore Creelman. He also did screenplays for The Most Dangerous Man and The Last Performance. Popular Sin is probably his best, but we only have 1 or 2 reels of that. 6 of them are gone.
Yeah, it's the most tragic thing about this time period.
Yeah.
Is I was even reading books from the 70s about the 30s film time, and they talked about movies that were available then that I looked up after reading this book and said they're lost now. And it's one of the most shocking things that in the past 50 years we've lost hundreds, thousands of meaningful pictures.
I've mentioned this before. When Metro Films joined with Goldwyn and Meyer to make MGM, Metro just burned everything they ever used to do before joining. There was like thousands of films of the 20s and the 1910s. They just burned it.
Well, in fact, King Kong, in a way, became slightly victim to the lost film of time, in that there was the production code, I believe that was what it was called, was started about the time this film came out. Yeah, and so they kind of had a run of it. They cut a couple of minutes out of the film, some of the most notorious scenes, if you will, that were believed to have been lost at time. Eventually, a print was found in the 60s. So if you're wondering if you have the theatrical cut of the film or the extended cut, which is the original intended version, the extended cut of the film is 100 or 104 minutes with an intermission, or with a beginning 4 minutes.
Right. If you have the certain salacious scene of when he takes her clothes off and then he tickles her.
Yeah.
And then he sniffs his finger. You got the...
Yeah.
Because prior to 1969, I think nobody's really seen the film that was featured in theaters. The first time it was ever on TV was 1956. So you got to understand, there's a huge gap from 1933, and people went to the theater to see it, till it was finally on television again.
Yeah.
In 1956. They didn't really put it out maybe every 5 years, maybe kick it out again.
Yeah, I saw a re-release commercial for 38. So the film had at least carried a little bit, but of course by then you also had things like, you had its sequel, Son of Kong, you had this spin-off film that was Mighty Joe Young, and then of course Kong had kind of made his own journey through the 60s and 70s with going over to Toho and having a crossover with Godzilla, and then his own sequel to that film, King Kong Escapes. and then finally getting the remake treatment of the 70s. So really, he'd been on a journey through the decades, I guess.
Absolute journey. So the film technique is a 3-layer technique where you shoot the live action between a matte board, and then you get another film of the foreground, and then the last one is the stop motion.
Yep.
So that's why it looks like it's a full extension, but the stop motion is the back, then the background, and then the live action, and that's what you can see initially throughout the movie, that kind of 3-layer trick that pretty much revolutionized filmmaking.
Yeah, and it gives the frame depth too, much in the same way that the forced perspective of the Lord of the Rings films and making the Hobbits shorter gave the film depth purely by means of having layering in your sets or layering in your production. And I think nowhere is that more apparent than that shot, that famous shot of Fay Wray being held as the monkey comes up and examines her before taking her into the jungle.
The original Scream Queen, Fay Wray.
Yeah.
She was actually, she was a supermodel at the time. It was almost like hiring Angelina Jolie to do this movie.
But again, it's that art imitates life thing of even the character she plays in the film, Ann Darrow, was not acting, but she was brought because of her looks in a lot of ways.
We have done so many movies where there's a movie, making a movie inside the movie.
Yeah.
King Kong is one of those. We're making a movie inside the movie, what we're seeing.
Yeah, and no time is that. Yeah, I feel like maybe that would be a kind of a cool movie, like a disaster artist kind of film about the making of King Kong in a lot of ways. And I think no time would that be more prevalent than the fact that we still have King Kong crossing over with Godzilla. They just announced the sequel to Godzilla vs. Kong. So he's still in the cultural zeitgeist more than ever.
So let's talk about a little bit. I want to get to the writing. I talked about James Ashmore Creel. He kind of started the foundation of it. Other director, Ernest Schoedsack. He married his wife at the time, Ruth Rose. She also kind of cleaned up. I think she cut a lot of the movie kind of slow. The original script was very slow driven, and she kind of speed up the process of let's get it out there, let's go, because it does take a while before you see Kong in this movie.
Yeah, I think 46 minutes into the film, which is still faster than the Peter Jackson remake, but 46 minutes into the film, you finally see Kong show up. That's one thing that always kind of shocked me in a few ways, because my introduction to King Kong was the 2005 film. And so finding that Kong didn't show up for 45 minutes of the 30s film, and then finding that New York sequence was kind of about 15 minutes, which I really thought was going to be much longer, was really shocking to me as a viewer.
I know, because we talked about a lot of things you're famous for in a movie are not really, the duration of it is not very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about the initiation where this all takes place in the mall, but at the end it's only like 10 minutes of the movie. It's almost in the mall.
Yeah, and like that whole New York sequence to me is the defining aspect of King Kong. It's the thing I think of most. Not just the Empire State Building, but the idea of him loose in the city is absolutely terrifying to 5-year-old Kyle. And it still is all these years later.
Just don't put him on a stage that fits his size. So what we doing for the writing perspective, it's very simple. This is actually one of my favorite conflicts, man against nature. You try to control nature. And no matter what you try to control, it's going to get out of your hands to devastating consequences. But also, Kong is never really the bad guy. He's just doing what naturally he always does. This is, you're infiltrating his life. It's almost like, taking him out of his element. And I don't know, Crocodile Dundee is almost like the same thing. Let's say Crocodile, let's take you to New York City. And then it's almost like, this is an entirely different jungle. It's almost like a jungle.
Yeah, all 3 of the Beverly Hills Cop films rely on the fact that he's not in Detroit, clearly.
Yeah, so it's always, I love this concept of we take somebody out of their element. And it's almost like, well, it's kind of the same, but it's still a little different.
Well, and of course, the film leading up to Kong being out of his element is these filmmakers being out of their element. So it's that juxtaposition, too, of them getting in too deep, and then they actually force Kong to do the exact same thing. But yeah, that conflict is really strong, and that hero's journey is very simplistic, and that probably comes a little bit from Ruth Rose's recutting of that script.
Yeah. Also, he's not really necessarily the bad guys. It's the humans are the bad guys. But also this element of Beauty and the Beast kind of a thing that you see it's a good formula if you can play it out pretty well.
Yeah.
That he has, it's not really like, it's this infatuation almost. Like he cares, he knows it's a living person, sovereign being, but it's also, it's my toy. Almost.
Yeah. And it's interesting how each of the subsequent remakes would kind of reinterpret and recontextualize the relationship between Anne and Kong. How, like one person who viewed this movie thought one way about it and made the 70s film. One person viewed this movie and made the '05 film, and it feels different. And, it's interesting that every single time we've recontextualized that relationship, and we're not really sure still exactly how he feels about her, other than that need to have.
So, we'll get into a minute. It's been 90 years old. Up next is our review of King Kong. So, I think this is about the 10th time I've seen this movie. It keeps getting better and better. Carl, what did you think of King Kong, for God's sake?
Well, this is the second time I've seen it, and I mean, what I find always so interesting about it is that you watch these kinds of movies. This one feels like more so than like a Frankenstein or a Dracula for the time, one where you kind of have to appreciate the time period and appreciate what was being done on film. Okay. Because I do think people that view this film without understanding the awe of what was being accomplished,
I think it was massive,
might lose it a little bit.
Right.
But it stayed with me because I've always been that person. I was one of those guys that had those orange books. And if you guys are watchers of the show, you probably know those orange monster books.
What the hell monster?
They were like these kids' books that were like 50 pages long. Each one was about a different monster. And you had Dracula and Frankenstein. I had a King Kong one when I was a kid. And I read that book cover to cover so many times that I'd actually seen the movie in my head before I ever watched it. And there's something powerful about immersing yourself in that kind of a filmmaking environment and seeing it on the big screen and seeing, oh my God, it's incredible and it's wonderful. And this is a movie that I've seen it in reverse order. I've seen '05 first, then I saw the 70s film, then I saw the 30s film. But it's never failed to have that awe ability for me.
What the hell is going to be the closing act? I mean, you open the curtain. What, are you going to get him to dance or...
Yeah, that's the whole thing is like there's differences in each version of that where it's kind of like it's not about Anne as much in the finale until he goes for her. And like the Peter Jackson film, they were going to try and get a she's on stage situation going of like, Beauty and the Beast.
Well, it's always let's put the mirror back on Hollywood. This is what you do. You exploit people to make money.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost like you do this. You take them out of the element and look at this creature. Give me a couple bucks and I'll show him to you.
Yeah, there's that joke of shooting someone, robbing them, and then blaming them for
wasting my bullets.
Right. Yeah,
I had to shoot you. I had to waste bullets. You would just give me my money.
Yeah, the system itself, and it's funny again because of how much the film art imitates life. It's interesting that we perceive Denham as kind of a bad guy because, like I said earlier, our two directors very much have Denham-like backgrounds. That maybe they didn't even realize they were painting themselves as kind of villains of their own film.
That's why I think it is important to recognize the people who wrote the story, because I think Ruth Rose kind of wrote the director and the cinematographer almost like her husband and Cooper in real life a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's notorious to go out in the street and just find talent.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the movie to really cut that quick. Do you want to be in movies? I'll drop my groceries and off I go.
Yeah. Yeah, and that idea that Hollywood doesn't care so much about your abilities as a performer, but they care about what they can get from you in this current time period. That speaks to Anne's character as well as Kong's character as well.
It's tough to pretend you're a bad actress. I love, that's my favorite. All right, let's just rehearse this. Now you see a big monster. Oh, it's devastating. But then she really sees it. She's like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, it's nice to see her have two different responses. The fake response of like when he's doing the screen test with her. And really like the part where she's most enigmatic during the screen test is the scream. It's during that classic moment when she screams, and that's where we get our scream queen ideal of her, is that first time she screams on camera is just deafening. And then to see her react so differently, so vehemently trying to get away from Kong when she's given to him, shows that kind of animalistic side of she's not acting anymore. That's us as the audience realizing that, oh my God, she's really in this horrible situation.
There's some great other YouTube videos that explain a little more better than we do the visual effects that they did in this movie that still was prevalent and still were used up to the 80s and 90s, the matte paintings and the slide pictures that they were still used. You understand if you watch Jurassic Park how this is just another... I'm sure Spielberg went and watched this movie before you did Jurassic Park.
Oh, yeah, with the gates opening and stuff, there's no way
and
that's
very
not
much it takes a long time to actually see the dinosaurs. We went to see Jurassic Park, we were like, let's go. I came here to see the dinosaurs. There they are.
Do you think there's someone in that movie theater on opening night that was like, now you didn't plan on having Kong in this film,
let's
right?
see Kong. Shut up, Captain, and let's go. Right, yes.
Enough of telling me why women don't belong on boats.
And And give me all the details why nobody ever goes to Skull Island.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's never called Skull Island in this film. I don't think I picked up on that until
I think it's just on the map.
It's Skull Mountain they refer to, but they never call the island anything. And it's so weird, again, because Skull Island is so synonymous with King Kong, and yet it's never named that in the actual film.
Yeah.
I find that so peculiar.
So it came out at the right time of this exploration subculture that was kind of adventures, seeking adventures, of the 30s. Mm-hmm. Which also the serials that Indiana Jones got inspired of, with the adventure serials. But also it came at the right time that blockbuster. People didn't really, that name or that word wasn't really familiar with people in the 30s.
Yeah, I think the first iteration where people really knew a film as blockbuster wasn't even until Jaws in like 75. Yeah. So this one coming out, and again, right in time with those Universal monsters. We had Dracula and Frankenstein in 31, this film in 33, and that's in a lot of ways why they kind of became a little bit more intertwined, even though they're so drastically different kinds of films. King Kong is an adventure picture. It's a big budget looking movie that really like flashes to the screen, where those other ones are kind of more darkness, more brooding, more horror.
The horror aspect of like Dracula's more, the aesthetic is haunting. And it's not to mention they've done these monster movies before, but it's telling you the formula that's still prevalent today, which is special effects, sound, not a great, bare minimum of a story.
Yeah.
But you have to have a little patience. And I think you don't get Jurassic Park unless you have King Kong. You don't get Transformers and stuff like that, the other summer blockbusters, before RKO demonstrated this template of how you do it.
Well, and Tomoyuki Tanada, I think I said that right. He was one of the people credited for creating Godzilla. Said a lot of my influence came from King Kong.
Right.
And when you really think about it, were there any other big monster characters that had that kind of level of persistence in the zeitgeist until Godzilla appeared in 54? You had 20 years where, if you're talking about a big monster in a movie, it's probably King Kong.
And I really don't fault any of the other King Kong movies that came out. Except for the King Kong versus Godzilla in 56, and it was a draw. I was upset about that.
Yeah, there was always that legend that there was two cuts, one where one wins and one where the other wins, and it was like, no, that never actually happened.
No.
They both went on to have sequels. So
right. There's also a Queen Kong. You can find that, and it's from the UK in the 70s. And it's like, watch out, she's on the rag or something like that on the poster.
Really? Yeah, it's peculiar the ways in which they've tried to make King Kong a franchise character, and it's very rarely worked for them. Son of Kong came out in 1933. They fast-tracked the sequel to this movie because of how popular
and I think they
this
still
film
use
was.
the same kind of template of stop motion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have, like I mentioned before, Mighty Joe Young, which was kind of spin-off-ish. We had, Robert Armstrong as Carl Denham. But he wasn't playing Carl Denham, he was somebody else.
Yeah, Mighty Joe Young. Ruth Rose wrote the screenplay for a lot of, and Son of Kong, too.
Yeah,
also.
And then, of course, you have the 70s film with King Kong Lives, the sequel, which that's, I think, the only part of it I haven't seen.
Yeah, and the first time I ever saw it was the Jeff Bridges, Jessica Lange version.
Yeah, which is probably, for me, the weakest one. It's just one I don't go back to very often. Whereas I, on a yearly basis, rewatch the King Kong 05 film. I just fell in love with that one watching it. And I'm also a very guilty pleasure fan of the MonsterVerse that's been out. And the way that they've utilized King Kong in that way, too, has been kind of interesting. So,
all right. A lot more to talk about, but what do you have to say about King Kong?
Yeah. Is this your favorite King Kong movie? It might be.
It's
it might
still
not
fascinating.
be. I think a lot of people love the film that they grew up with first.
This is one of those films that I still find things. I think I've seen all of it. I still find new things that I didn't really pay attention to.
Yeah. I think in my rewatch, I noticed a lot more the silliness of like the fake body droppings when people are bitten and stuff.
Or
and
the
they
smoke.
go flying
I always forget
away
there's
like
smoke
this,
bombs
or-
in it.
Yeah.
Like what that gonna do?
Very peculiar the way that you and again that's because of all the remakes and stuff too, is you remember events almost differently because you've seen different versions of it. But definitely let us know your thoughts on the film down below.
Go ahead.
Would you like to see us cover one of the remakes of King Kong or perhaps the sequel Son of Kong? Let us know about that too. Or if you want us to go further down the Cooper Shodzak realm, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
I don't mind going down a rabbit hole.
No, we've gone down a many, and many more we'll have to do. Thank you guys for watching the show.
Yes,
We really
thank
do
you.
appreciate it. Please comment down below. It's one of our favorite things to do to communicate with our fans and viewers as we do.
Absolutely.
And you can find all of my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
Once again, thanks for watching, and you can find my podcast, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.